Hello, friends. Let me start with a question that goes straight to the heart. Do you know one of the most painful lies we've been told about aging? We're constantly told that after 60, the most important thing is to be surrounded by family, and that if you're not with them, life loses its meaning. It sounds nice, it sounds right, it almost sounds sacred. But it's not always true. I've seen people flourish precisely when they distance themselves from certain family members. And no, I'm not just talking about extreme stories of abuse or elderly people who finally find peace after decades of silent suffering. I'm talking about something more common than you might imagine. The daily wear and tear of living with relationships that drain more than they nourish. After more than 30 years working with thousands of people to help them live life to the fullest, I've noticed a very specific pattern in older adults. A deep sadness mixed with guilt. They come to therapy with a constant feeling that something is wrong with me, because they don't enjoy family gatherings, because they prefer peace and quiet to visits from their children, because they feel a knot in their stomach every time the phone rings, and they know exactly who's calling. That knot doesn't come from nowhere. It stems from a cultural idea repeated throughout a lifetime. Family is sacred, unquestionable, the ultimate refuge, and when you reach 60, 70, or 80, it's supposed to be time to reap the love you've sown. But what happens when that harvest never comes? What happens when what arrives is resentment, tension, indifference, or a toxicity disguised as obligation? That internal conflict is what we're going to dismantle today with respect, awareness, and, above all, honesty. Because turning 60 doesn't mean losing the right to choose who deserves to be in your life. If this topic resonates with you, stay with me, because it can change the way you're experiencing this stage of life that we're all going to face, or that perhaps you're already experiencing. Let me begin with a true story. A few years ago, Marta, a 6-7-year-old woman, came to my office with a depression she had been battling for decades. Marta had raised 3 children almost entirely on her own while her husband traveled constantly for work. She sacrificed her career as a music teacher, her friendships, her personal dreams, everything for her family. And like so many others, life promised her a reward at the end of the road. Joyful gatherings, grandchildren visiting their grandmother, Sundays sharing memories, a home filled with love. The reality was devastatingly different. Her children visited her out of obligation, in a rush, constantly checking their watches. The conversations were superficial, full of reproaches disguised as concern. Mom, you look tired. Are you eating well? It sounded like interest, but there was no real emotional care. They sought her out as a free babysitter when it suited them, but almost never to sit down for a coffee and ask her how she was truly feeling. And the worst part wasn't just the lack of affection. The worst part was that Marta felt guilty for feeling unwell. They're my children, she told me, crying. What kind of mother am I if I don't enjoy being with them? There must be something wrong with me. And that's when I replied with something that changed the course of that conversation. Marta, there's nothing wrong with you. What's wrong is the idea that we should unconditionally love people who treat us conditionally. Because this is the first crucial point. Love isn't a matter of genetic obligation. Sharing DNA doesn't guarantee emotional compatibility, mutual respect, or psychological well-being. Biology connects us, yes, but it doesn't force us to maintain relationships that break us inside. We live in a society that venerates the family without question. From childhood, we're told that family comes first, that blood is thicker than water, that we must honor our parents, and later that children are the greatest treasure. But almost no one prepares you for a scenario that also exists. When that family fails to meet basic needs, when respect is lacking, when affection is intermittent or conditional, when your presence is only useful at certain times, modern psychology has shown something simple and compelling. Healthy relationships are sustained by reciprocity, genuine affection, and respect, not by labels or blood ties. That's why when an older person feels uncomfortable with their family, they often don't allow themselves to say it out loud. They swallow it down. They convince themselves that they should be happy. And that word, should, can become a prison. At this point, I always recall something that comes up repeatedly in therapy. People who, surrounded by family, feel more alone than when they are at home in peace and quiet. Because there are 2 very different kinds of loneliness. Physical loneliness, which you can choose and manage, and emotional loneliness, which you experience even when surrounded by others, when they ignore you, criticize you, or use you. The first can be a space of peace. The second, frequently, is a constant drain. In Marta's case, we worked for months until we reached a decision that sounds radical to many, but it's actually an act of self-care. She set clear boundaries. She told her children that she wouldn't be available as a babysitter whenever they wanted, that she expected respect, and that if the visits were going to be tense and full of recriminations, she preferred to space them out. What happened? At first there was resistance, anger, even attempts to make her feel guilty. But over time, one of her children reflected and began to change his attitude. The other two distanced themselves. It was painful, yes, but Marta began to flourish. She reconnected with music, made new friends in a local choir, and for the first time in decades, she woke up without that oppressive anxiety in her chest. She lost family, yes. She gained life. Also, yes, now, not all troubled family relationships are the same. Over the years, I've identified recurring patterns, especially after age 60, and understanding them is key because it helps you distinguish whether you're facing a real problem or if they're just telling you you're too sensitive. The first is the utilitarian family, those children or relatives who only show up when they need something, money, babysitting, letting them use the house, signing documents. But when you need company, medical help, or simply someone to listen, they're always busy. The devastating thing about this pattern is that it's often disguised as affection. Mom, you're the only one I trust. It sounds like a compliment, but when there's no reciprocity, it becomes emotional exploitation. The hidden message is clear. Your value lies in what you do for us, not in who you are. I remember Roberto, a man who told me how his 3 children visited him frequently until he sold his business and retired with a modest pension. When he was no longer financially useful, the visits became less frequent until they almost disappeared. Roberto felt used, discarded, like an object that loses value over time, and he was right to feel that way. The second pattern is the critical family. This includes relatives who constantly point out what you're doing wrong. Your house is messy, you dress inappropriately, you eat too much or too little, you should exercise more, you should go out more, you should stay home. No matter what you do, there's always criticism, a sarcastic comment, or a disapproving gesture. This toxicity is especially dangerous because it's disguised as concern. I'm telling you this because I love you is the critical family member's favorite phrase. But there's a huge difference between genuine concern and control disguised as care. Genuine concern listens, asks questions, and offers options. Controlling criticizes, imposes, and undermines your decisions. It's not the same for a child to say, Mom, have you been feeling tired? Do you want me to go with you to the doctor? As it is for them to say, Mom, you look terrible, that's why you get sick, you never listen to me. That's not care, that's toxic criticism. And after 60, when you're facing physical changes, losses, adjustments to retirement, and new fears, you don't need your own family to be your harshest critic. The third pattern is the guilt-inducing family. They are experts at emotional manipulation. They use phrases like, after everything I've done for you, you're gonna be the death of me. We're your only family. At your age, you should think differently. Every conversation becomes a minefield of guilt. Any decision you make for your own well-being is interpreted as betrayal. Teresa, 72, wanted to move to a smaller apartment closer to her friends, more manageable for her daily life. Her children vehemently opposed it. How can you do this to us? We grew up in that house. You don't care about our memories. How selfish you are. Notice the language. She was selfish for wanting to live comfortably in her own life. Guilt, when used like this, is a brutal tool of control. The fourth pattern is the absent family. There are no dramatic fights or open conflict. They simply disappear. They stop calling, stop visiting, stop showing interest. The excuses are the same. Work, distance, commitments. But the real message is this. You are not a priority. This pattern hurts in a particular way because there is no clear event you can point to. There is only silence, indifference, emptiness. And here's something important. Emotional abandonment is no less valid than explicit abuse. Neglect hurts. Feeling invisible to your own children hurts deeply. The fifth pattern is the most complex, the ambivalent family. They alternate between moments of genuine affection and episodes of abuse or neglect. One day they call you lovingly, the next day disappear for weeks. One visit is warm, the next full of reproaches. This inconsistency is exhausting because you can anticipate which version you'll encounter. You live on high alert, like walking on eggshells, trying to guess what will trigger the change. And it's hard to walk away because the good moments give you hope. Maybe they're changing, you think, but the pattern repeats itself. and the roller coaster ends up leaving you exhausted and confused. If you recognize yourself in any of these, take a breath. You're not alone. Acknowledging this is the first real step. Now, the next thing is to understand something many people underestimate: the physical and mental impact of maintaining harmful family relationships after 60 isn't just feeling sad. It has measurable consequences. Let's start with the physical aspect. It has been observed that older adults in conflicted family relationships have a higher risk of developing problems such as high blood pressure compared to those who maintain healthy relationships or live happily alone. Why? Because chronic stress keeps the body in a constant state of tension. When you anticipate an unpleasant call or a tense visit, your nervous system goes into alert mode, as if you were in danger, even when you're sitting in your living room. This sustained state raises cortisol levels, increases blood pressure, and inflames the cardiovascular system. I've seen patients literally get sick days before a mandatory family gathering, headaches, digestive problems, insomnia, and flare-ups of chronic conditions they had previously managed. The body doesn't lie. Sometimes your mind tries to justify things, but your body is warning you, and it's not just the body. Let's talk about the emotional toll. Depression in older adults is strongly linked to unsatisfying family relationships. I'm not talking about fleeting sadness. I'm talking about clinical depression, loss of interest in things you once enjoyed, changes in sleep and appetite, a persistent feeling of worthlessness, and in severe cases, suicidal thoughts. Carmen, 68, developed severe depression after years of emotional abuse from her only daughter. One day she told me, "I don't understand why I'm still alive. If even my own daughter doesn't love me, what's the point?" Family rejection in old age directly impacts one's sense of purpose and self-worth. Anxiety also comes at a huge cost. That feeling of walking on eggshells, of not knowing which comment might ignite conflict, of constantly anticipating the next verbal blow. Some people develop such strong anticipatory anxiety that their quality of life deteriorates weeks before a scheduled family event. Imagine living like that at 70, when you're supposed to be calmer, exploring hobbies, deepening friendships, enjoying a different pace of life. Instead, your energy is consumed managing the toxicity of those who should love you. But there's a more subtle and devastating cost: the loss of yourself. When you spend decades prioritizing other people's needs, swallowing your pride to keep the peace, accepting mistreatment to avoid breaking up the family, something terrible can happen. You forget who you are beyond your family role. Who are you without being the self-sacrificing mother, the provider father, the available grandmother, the uncle who always solves problems? Many people reach their 60 seconds or 70 seconds without being able to answer that. Their identity evaporated in the attempt to maintain a harmony that sometimes didn't even exist. Alberto, 74, came to therapy after retiring. For the first time in decades, he had free time. I asked him what he wanted to do, what he liked, what his passions were. He drew a blank. 50 years as the provider, and he had never asked himself what he wanted. And when his adult children continued to treat him as if he were only a source of money, Alberto understood something painful. They had never seen him as a whole person, with his own needs and dreams. This loss of identity is especially common among women of older generations, where sacrifice was celebrated. What a good mother, always thinking of her children. But almost no one asked what she thought, what she needed, what she dreamed of. Reclaiming your identity after 60 is possible, but it requires courage. Courage to defy expectations, to face criticism, to choose yourself when your whole life you were taught that choosing yourself is selfish. And here guilt appears, which often acts as a wall. Guilt whispers that setting boundaries is cruel, that distancing yourself is abandonment, that prioritizing yourself is selfishness. But in many cases, this guilt isn't a moral compass. It's a tool of control you've learned to obey. The curious thing is that we tend to be compassionate toward others. To a friend, you'd say, "Don't tolerate that. Value yourself. Set boundaries." But when it comes to yourself, you punish yourself. Why? Because many of us were taught that our worth lies in sacrifice. That the more we understand, the more we endure, the more we suffer for our family, the better we are. And that's false. Your worth as a person is inherent. You don't need to earn it through suffering. You don't need to prove it by tolerating mistreatment. You exist. You have dignity. There's another very common guilt after 60, the guilt of wasted time. Many people realize they've squandered decades in unfulfilling relationships. And instead of using that realization to change the present, they become paralyzed with remorse. Why didn't I realize it sooner? I've wasted so much time. It's too late now. Let me be blunt. It's never too late to choose your well-being. You're 60, 70, 80. So what? Is your life worth less? Does your peace matter less? That idea that after a certain age, it doesn't matter anymore is another destructive myth. Every day you live deserves to be lived with dignity, with respect, and, when possible, with joy. It doesn't matter how many years you have left, they deserve to be your years, not years hijacked by toxic family obligations. I remember Francisco, an 82-year-old man, who came to my office after years of humiliating treatment from his eldest son. He said to me, "Doctor, I'm 82, what's the point of changing?" I replied, "Francisco, if you were to live 5 more years, would you prefer 5 years of peace or 5 more years of this?" He cried, not out of drama, but because no one had ever allowed him to think that his life still mattered. The truth is this: your family's discomfort with your boundaries is not your responsibility. They may get angry, call you selfish, threaten to distance themselves, and here's the irony. Often, the relationship they threatened to break was already fundamentally broken because there was no respect, no care, no reciprocity. You are not on this earth to meet expectations. You are here to live your life. And if you finally realize that at 60, 70, or 80, it's not too late. It's just in time. Now, understanding this intellectually is one thing. Knowing what to do is another. So let's get practical. Getting away from a toxic family doesn't always mean cutting everything off forever. There's a spectrum of options between tolerating everything and disappearing. The point is to find your place on that spectrum based on your situation, your resources, and your health. One option is limited contact with clear boundaries. This works when there are still positive aspects to the relationship, but you need a structure. You define when, how, and under what conditions there will be interaction. Another option is to create a strategic physical distance if you can. Sometimes moving, even not very far, creates emotional space that didn't exist before. You can also create emotional distance. Don't answer every call instantly. Don't be available every weekend. Choose your own time. In some cases, written communication can be a powerful tool, especially when verbal conversations always end in conflict. A message gives you time to think, to avoid impulsive reactions, and it leaves a record of what was said. Another alternative is to maintain a superficial and cordial contact. It sounds cold, but it can be a shield. Talking about neutral topics without revealing your innermost feelings to someone who might use them as ammunition. For others, contact only works on specific occasions, important events, and nothing more. And in cases where you need to heal, there's the option of a temporary break with the possibility of review. A defined period without contact to regain stability. And yes, there is also the final cut. It's the hardest option and not taken lightly. But sometimes it's the only one that preserves your mental and physical health, especially when there's severe abuse, constant manipulation, or irreparable harm. I've seen people mourn that loss as a grief, because that's what it is. But I've also seen something important. They rarely regret having protected their peace. What they do regret is the time they spent tolerating abuse. When a toxic person dies, you often don't mourn the relationship you ended. You mourn the relationship you never had and always hoped for. That grief, with or without contact, was there. Now, to sustain any change, there's a crucial step: building an alternative support network. Because letting go of a toxic family when you have no one else is scary. This is where the idea of chosen family comes in. After 60, many people believe it's impossible to make new friends, that everyone already has their own life, that no one will want a new connection. That belief is false. There are thousands of people in the same situation looking for genuine connections. The key is to place yourself in contexts where those connections can flourish. Interest groups, book clubs, walks, art classes, volunteering, community spaces. Friendship is built through repetition and shared experiences. I've seen how volunteering, for example, creates deep bonds because it unites purpose with routine. I've also seen people find belonging in spiritual or philosophical communities. And yes, even in technology used well. Online groups, forums, spaces designed to connect people with similar interests. And sometimes the most accessible communities in the neighborhood. That park you go to at the same time every day. That neighbor who always says hello. Those small conversations that over time become real support. As you rebuild, you develop clearer criteria for which relationships nourish you and which drain you. And that